Bringing in Tom Murphy. Tom, big news out of the Big 12 in Dallas yesterday. Bob Bowlesby announced that the Big 12 is going to continue to press on and try and play fall sports this fall. Kind of your thoughts on the press release as of yesterday.
Well, the Big 12, much like the SEC and the ACC, are moving forward with their plans. It doesn't mean they are definitely going to play football. Obviously, things could change and they could put a halt to things. But in my opinion, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 acted a little bit quickly. They had different medical situations that played a big role, I think, in their decisions. And so the athletes at SEC schools like Arkansas will be able to start practicing on Monday, and 5 days later could be in full pads. So, that's where we are. And I understand there's great rifts in this country, and a lot of people are expressing very heated opinions about it. And I think the coronavirus has, largely triggered a lot of animosity and division, and it's sad. But, we've got to keep on pushing as a country, and, we'll see what happens. But a lot of media members have, in recent days, advocated as much for pulling the plug on this thing, and to the point where almost throwing tantrums and, we're going to take your SEC football and go home with it.
Yeah, Tom, it's like they're shaming, rooting it for it to fail, and for all these kids that have busted their tails in the offseason, and I know there's dangers involved, as you've talked about. We're not doctors or anything, but like you mentioned, it almost seems like some guys and gals are rooting for these kids not to be able to put what their heart and soul has been, not only just this past offseason, but the last couple of years, man.
I think many of the media members who basically lobbied against having football, I think their hearts are in the right place. They don't want to see any football players come down with something and have a really bad outcome on it. But there's been dripping condescension in many quarters when it comes to how they write about this, and that's the part that kind of bothers me. But, I mean, there was one that basically compared the folks who want to play football, you could lay a Venn diagram over them and the folks who, refuse to wear masks, and it would basically be the same people. And to me, that's it's condescension and very judgmental. And I don't like to see that kind of thing.
Tom, my take is a lot of these, whether you're on the Clay Travis side or the Pat Forty, Darren Ravel side, they've went so far with their take and opinion. They've written so much, said so much. Now they've got to root for that. So if you're on the Darren Ravel side, well, you've got to root for the season to not happen because you want to be right. And and now it's about being right, not getting right, but being right. And I think that's where a lot of this is well, hell, if the season actually plays, now everything I've said for 60 or 90 days is wrong. And if the season played 10 games and there weren't issues and they got through this and crowned a national champion, I look foolish. And I think that's a real fear with some of these reporters.
Well, there's probably a bit of that, I suppose. And I happen to catch Kirk Herbstreit, who I think is a very balanced, rational guy. And he said at the very beginning, if y'all remember, it was that weekend, March the 13th, right at the end of that week when it all happened, Kirk Herbstreit was on record as saying, I don't see how we have a college football season unless there's a vaccination for this. And at that time, no one expected for there to be any chance of having a vaccination. In fact, I think they were saying early 2021 at the earliest. But then I also heard Kirk on the Paul Feinbaum show on Tuesday, and given the opportunity to say, are they making a mistake by pushing forward? Kirk was, pretty tactful about what he said, and he said, the science is going to lead them to their decision. I just think the Big Ten felt the pressure from the MAC having canceled its season, or you can try to play in the spring, what have you. That just doesn't seem realistic, and maybe they can work something out that's not a full schedule. And frankly, I hope they do work something out. I love college football, and I'm not rooting against any conference or region of the country or any political segment of the country.
I think
so.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up. I think one of the more interesting developing stories is as the players are working through this and their voices are being heard more, conferences are certainly positioning their statements, as we saw with the Big 12, that, hey, we're listening to our players. Players are getting a louder voice in all this, Tom, and there's certainly a movement for a players' union, a players' association of some sort. We saw a group of senators come out with a proposed bill that may go before Congress soon. We'll see how that progresses. I think maybe one of the bigger stories beyond just obviously whether or not we're going to play games is what is going to happen with players and player rights and the level of power they have. Tom, I think the structure of college football and maybe the structure of athletic departments is certainly looking like there's change on the horizon. As you read these stories, as you see what is being proposed and what is being talked about, what do you think the next 12 or 24 months looks like as far as how college athletics is structured?
Yeah, there'll be a ton of vigorous debate about all this stuff, and I do think that there's going to be a restructuring of some sort. But I also think that if the players have some kind of a union, that may be a little bit of a bridge too far. If they have a strong voice in NCAA meetings and that kind of thing, which I hope they do, that's another thing. But the unionized part of this thing is where it gets real tricky. Mm-hmm. But their voice is going to be heard, and I think that the We Want to Play movement has kind of solidified the position of the 3 power leagues that are still going, and the group of 5 leagues as well. And I don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be, but I like the idea of moving forward judiciously. And if the numbers at some point say this is really not a good idea, then putting a halt to your season. But what you hear from many people is right now we have environments around our football programs that are, taking your temperature when you come in, 2 tests a week, and when competition rolls around, 3 tests a week. And I feel for the Big Ten because they had the reported 5 athletes who had myocarditis as a result of having COVID-19 infections, and that's where it gets a little bit more serious. And some of the stories that were out on Tuesday, basically the lawyers are circling, looking for liability issues, and that's what was in Pat's story on Tuesday, and that Tom Mars had emailed him, and so hey, the lawyers I think are lined up for concussion issues and everything else, so no surprise there.
Mars is Bielema's counsel,
exactly.
right? That's what kind of stood out to his note for me, Tom, because you mentioned that it seems like with what Tommy was bringing up earlier, and we had John. Did you listen to Atlanta Sports Radio when you go back home?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we had John Kincaid on 2 days ago, and he brought up the Darren Ravel and Clay Travis comparison that Tommy just did, and it seems like that certain media members are wanting to be right more than they're actually wanting to see this thing come to conclusion, whether it's like depending on what side you're on. I hope, obviously, I don't really care if I'm right or wrong when it comes to this. I just hope these kids get to play and it goes successfully in the health aspect of things, right? Like, that's what we should be rooting for. Not that we're right, but that this can go well and there's not any health effects or anything like that.
Yeah, in our heart of hearts, what we all want is the normalcy that we crave. And the normalcy is to play college football in the fall and the sights and the sounds and the smells and the tears and the triumph and all that stuff. That's what we want, and we don't want the COVID to be any part of it. So my position has just been I would like to see college football played. Now, just in terms of, going out and, well, I won't get that deep into it, but I will just say that's what I hope happens. You've heard from Hunter Yurachek, who to me, his voice has been a strong one. one of the strongest in the SEC in terms of the we want to play movement, the post he had on Monday on that, and just his take that, hey, I've got sons. This is real life for me. I've got a son who's playing football, and we're comfortable with it. And by the way, speaking of Kirk Herbstreit, he's got a son, I guess 2 sons at Clemson.
2 walk-ons.
And he said, hey, my wife and I do not go to bed at night worried that our sons are going to get COVID and have a bad outcome. In fact, one of them's roommates had it, and he had to go in and quarantine for 14 days. So the guy who cautioned all the reason at the very beginning, or the concern about playing, he's not worried about his sons at Clemson, which had a pretty big outbreak. So, that's what we all want, I think, in our heart is safe playing of football. And if the numbers and the concern rises to a great point in the next 3 to 4 weeks, they might pump the brakes on it.
And I'll give you another example. Andrew Baselli, I think is his name. He was the Florida State offensive lineman that contracted COVID, started talking about it, but he wants to play this season. Like, he's already back, he's already doing stuff, and he wants to have this season occur for the ACC. So there's been several instances. Now, he's not as high profile as I think Jake, and I'm forgetting the other Herbstreit's name, or Hunter Yurchek's sons, obviously being the athletic director at Arkansas. But even these kids that have had it, Tom, and that have gone through some of the health concerns, they still want to play college football, which I think is another an important element when it comes to talking of all this.
Yeah, it really is, and we've said it on here before, but if you think that the athletes deserve a strong voice on, racial issues and justice issues and all that kind of stuff, then that's the same voice that's saying, hey, I want to play. So if they're old enough to have it on one opinion on one thing, then they're old enough to have a strong opinion on another thing. Yeah. So, hey, man, we'll see how this all plays out. I mean, there's still a lot of miles to go before they line up and kick it off. But I think the plans that they've tried to put in place, the way the testing that would be done for all game officials and all the players and the coaches, and they're wearing masks on the sidelines and all that kind of stuff, they're trying their best. And for anybody to just rip the SEC and the other conferences for saying, we're going to be judicious about this, we're going to slow play it, and we'll make the decision that best fits our needs at the time, I think is being disingenuous and has an agenda.
Yeah. Speaking of decisions and following the plan, you mentioned practice gets back underway next week. That's the current plan for SEC schools. Pads will follow a few days into it, I think 3 days, and then full contact later on in the week. That's the next big decision, either today, tomorrow, early next week. Tom, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you can't let these teams, whether it's Arkansas or any other school, move forward with full contact practice if you're not convicted, you're not convinced at that time that you fully plan to move forward with the season. If that's not really your plan, you can't really go through with practice, can you?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, and but events could force things along the way, even after they start practice.
Yeah, everything's fluid. But if you really don't want to play today, and you're just kicking the can down the road, you got to be real careful about starting practice. I think that's a key indicator: is what do these ADs and these schools do with practice next week?
Absolutely. If they get through the weekend and everything seems to be on course, then we'll see. Of course, Monday and Tuesday are just helmets only, so that's not a whole lot different than what they had been doing with walkthroughs, just, faster speed and that kind of thing. But I will say this. Hunter Yurchek, in the original comments he made to us about how do your athletes feel about this, you remember the response was they didn't want to start fall camp and go through the rigors of that and then not play a season. The difference between the statement then and now is this is not going to be a rigorous type fall camp in terms of the amount of time spent day after day. It is a super grind, as you guys know, for about 3 weeks during a regular camp when school's not in and they can go unlimited hours. This is regimented hours. This is the full contact will be, I think, limited. And they're also starting later, so school would start sooner. and it's 20 hours of practice a week. And that's not as taxing on them physically and mentally as normal camp. And they've had a lot of the planning and the skull sessions and the meetings. So they've gone over their schemes. Now it's just a matter of getting out there and executing them.
And that's what makes you scratch your head so much with the Big Ten. They're still going to allow the 20 hours with their teams, their players. They're still going to have workouts and meetings. And
that's at this point. They haven't.
Right, but as of today, that's the plan. Mm-hmm. So, hey, we're still going to go through football activities of some type, but we're not going to have a season. I mean,
that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, just what are we doing here?
Well, here's the thing. Even if the SEC were to call off football, I think it's better for the players to stay in a regimented type structure rather than peeling off and then thinking, all right, well, we're not doing this. I'm going to go to parties and stuff now. I'm going to break my social routine that we had really focused on. So, I mean, they're still going to be in school, and you can't just lose all your football conditioning. So I get it. I think it's smart for them to try to do, their 20 hours a week. It's just that there's
it doesn't all add up,
light at the end of the tunnel.
It just doesn't add up. So,
yep. Well, I mean, the structure is always good. Lou Holt, I quoted him in today's paper. I heard him on Fox News driving up back
Normandy, D-Day.
Lou Holtz was like, the players want to play, the coaches want to coach, the ADs want to play. At some point, we have to come out of this, bunker mentality we've got, and we've got to live our lives. And that's kind of my take on it.
Tom, before we let you go, man, I made about 60 grilled wings last night. They turned out pretty good, and I just want to, before we let you go, Tommy and I were discussing this, ranch or blue cheese when it comes to wings?
First of all, kudos to you for making them and turning them out good. I'm all over the ranch. I would eat both, but if I were to eat 40 wings, I'd say about 28 of them would be dipped in the ranch, and the other I'd dabble in blue cheese and honey mustard. I'm a huge sauce fan, as my stomach will attest to, and I like them all.
All right. Tom, as always, we appreciate it, man. You have yourself a great weekend. We'll talk on Tuesday.
Yeah, if we're talking Tuesday and things are active, we're going to have fun with that one because we're going to be talking about football stuff.
Yeah,
practice.
And at least partial pads the next day.
Starts on Monday.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
all right, have a good weekend.
Later, Tom.
See you.
Good stuff as always. And I like the ranch answer too. So.